Hello and welcome to the Offload. I'm your host, Phoenix Trinidad. This is Zero Tackle's newest show where we talk all things NRL, and today we are talking Vegas. We're recapping both of the games, and is the Vegas thing working? I don't know. I'm not sold. We're also talking about the Rabbitohs. Wayne Bennett thinks they can still make finals. Can they? Probably not. I don't know. We'll see. We'll talk about experts, and we're also getting to the bottom of the Mitch Moses stuff. Is that the right contract for the Eels in the long term? So, massive show. Let's get to it. And joining us for episode 2, the second week of the Offload from Zero Tackle, we have Darren Parkin, Zero Tackle analyst and Storm fan. Welcome, Daz.
Well, nice to be here again. Yeah, we feel a bit more grounded this week. Obviously, we're back from Vegas and we jump into some sense of normality.
Yeah, we are rolling. And then we also have the NRL Jersey Baron himself, Retro Rugby League. How are you, mate? Welcome to Offload.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Excited to talk all things rugby league, especially coming out of, I think, one of the best season openers we've seen, even building on last year.
Absolutely. And then we have the big man himself, the guy that keeps zerotackle.com running, Scott Pride. How are you, buddy?
Well, Phoenix, glad to be here chatting some footy. It's good to have rugby league back on the TV screen, isn't it? Great season openers yesterday. Keen to get into this.
Absolutely. And great to have you on the YouTube channel again. All right, let's get to the rundown. All right, so first thing on the rundown this episode. So the Raiders downing my guys, the Wars, in Vegas for the first game of the NRL season for 2025, 30-8. Retro. So it looks like the Raiders, their forwards are their biggest strength so far. One game, though.
Yeah, I mean, the forward pack certainly did roll through the middle. It's the blistering speed on the edges, though, that has really got me excited for Raiders fans. A lot of people predicted they would finish towards the bottom of the ladder. I thought they'd be too gritty. And now I'm thinking they're too skillful to warrant that. Will they finish top 8? I don't know. But there's a lot to like about that hot young side, both through the middle and out on those edges. And the fact that Xavier Savage is starting to roam from the wing is a very worrying sign for opposition. So there's a lot to like for the Green Machine.
I was going to say, I thought that was one of the major takeaways, was probably the pace. We did forecast last week how quick the surface played in the Vegas matches last year, and the Raiders were obviously able to exploit that. Obviously, the Warriors were a bit rough around the edges. Their halves struggled. I think they missed 36 tackles to 12 or something like that. They certainly were rusty to start the season, but I think the Raiders' pace and Savage, who we highlighted last week, Scott, was a major factor in that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Raiders' pace out wide, it was to their benefit throughout the game. But, I do go the other way. I think it was set up through the middle. Ricky Stewart hinted at that in his press conference, sort of was very, very impressed with the way his middles rolled through. And that grit they showed, as you said, Retro, the Raiders thought one of their biggest strengths coming into the season was going to be that grit through the middle. I think they lacked not having Corey Horsburgh out there last year. He was good. Obviously that forward pack led by Joe Tarpany as well. But yeah, I think Canberra is certainly in the mix for the top 8. It's way too early to say. But I think they're ahead of where I would have had them coming into yesterday, based on one game. Hard to say. I know the Warriors certainly were below the standard we would have expected, but I think they'll take some time to gel as well, just given, they've got a new halves combination there. Sean Johnson's retired, Tohu Harris is retired, so they will take time to gel. But I think the Raiders, all positives out of yesterday.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to be interesting, though, if they play very fast, Retro, the recovery from that Vegas trip, because we did see last year a couple of teams struggle to recover in the immediate aftermath of that Vegas trip.
Yeah, and I wonder for the Warriors, it wasn't the start they were after. It certainly wasn't the start I was expecting. There'd been a lot of talk in the preseason. There'd been a lot of good hard work done on those dark sandy beaches in NZ, and I thought the Warriors might be primed for something. I'm a little worried. There was a moment where the Raiders scored their third try, and the ball went to the left, and I think it was taken for an intercept. It was supposed to go to the right. All the other players were expecting it to go to the right. 3 sets of Warriors' hands went up in the air when it went left. It's a little bit of a reintroduction to that old chaotic Warriors style, and it worries me that they might fall back into that trap of trying to do everything all at once, where the one successful year they had was built off a really simple, straightforward game. Now, I know it's very early, and Dylan Walker had some good impact, but it was chaotic impact. So I feel like the Warriors, that'll be a real point for them to address, and they'll have a little bit of time to do it with that turnaround, but they'll have to make it right very soon.
And that's one of the biggest issues we've seen with the Warriors over the years, just their consistency and ability to play to a game plan throughout. I thought in 2023, when Andrew Webster arrived at the club, I thought, gee, they finally got a coach who can get them on the same page, playing the straight and narrow every week. But it fell away last year, and you're right, the signs yesterday were concerning. There's a lot of time to turn it around. How do teams actually adjust to that Vegas trip? How do they recover from that Vegas trip? Big questions. But the Warriors, there's questions that need to be answered in the next few weeks.
Yep. And just back on the Raiders, Scott, we were talking about Xavier Savage and how well he played, but there is a bit of trouble with the MRC coming out of that game.
Yeah, so both he and Joe Tarpany charged for various offences during the game yesterday. One thing it probably does from a Canberra point of view is allow them to, well, provided they accept their early guilty pleas and are actually suspended, it allows Sevilio Tamale to stay on the wing, have a few more games to become adjusted to first grade. I think that's a real selection question moving forward for Canberra once Savage comes back here, whether they go Tamale or Hopewade on that other wing. And they're going to both have a chance in the next couple of weeks to push for that spot. Obviously, Tarpany being out is enormous. He's virtually unreplaceable. So, and I'm not sure how Canberra go about that, Retro.
It's going to be tough, but Darren, I'd be interested to know from a kind of stat point of view, who would be those kind of middle forwards that would take them through? And are there new kind of hot young things, or are there old heads that can do the job for them?
Yeah, it was interesting just on the other point too with Savage. It was that key moment where he almost got sin binned. It was sort of touch and go, and then he scored, I think, 4 minutes later or thereabouts, which kind of rubbed salt into the wounds as well. And yeah, we spoke a little bit about it from a numbers point of view in the lead up to the game with the Raiders, the depth they do have, that sort of blend. And I think just on experience, not to jump too much on a tangent, we spoke on the Warriors side of the coin about how they weren't missing Johnson's form, so to speak, out of last season, but they've certainly missed his experience and his wise head. So I will dig up some of the numbers that I put together on that game in just a second. But yeah, I thought that was one of the key observations that I took out of it was the wise heads that the Warriors were missing that the Raiders seem to have in a situation like that, foreign territory. Big start to a season. You're trying to settle things down a little bit, and it really sort of could tell early in that chaotic style that you were talking about.
And I wonder just on that, Darren, like to me, one of the wisest and strongest heads in that Warriors team is RTS. And I just wonder if he's lost out there on that wing. Anytime something good happened for the Wars, he was involved, whether it be good hard running, whether it be pushing out on edge. The try that he almost scored, he pushed through when no one else did. I think he's just too good to have it wing. I know that puts an issue for Chance, but I really think if the Warriors win a premiership, it's with Roger at number one.
Yeah, it feels like you're taking him out of the dangerous situations too often. So, I'm of that school of thought as well. And we were looking at it too, perhaps the list imbalance that they had in that space. So, that's another watch and see if they can find a way to reshuffle.
Yep. So two very interesting teams coming out of that first game. But moving on to the second one. So next on the rundown, Panthers, Sharks. It was an interesting watch. I think it went just about as a few of us predicted in last week's show. But Darren, Nathan Cleary steering the Panthers to another win. And can he do it for 5 in a row this year based off that first game?
Yeah, I think last week we were assessing whether this was the best opportunity for the Sharks coming off last season. I know they beat the Storm on the road last year, but they looked clearly a step below the top couple. They'd recruited well with Fennell Blake, who had a very, very good game. Penrith had notoriously not been slow starters by any means, but they'd lost their opening game in the previous 2 seasons to the side they would end up playing in the grand final, the Broncos and the Storm over the last couple of years. And you thought the Sharks, it was only, slightly additional prep, but they hadn't lost a couple of the quality players that Penrith had lost. They hadn't had as many sort of niggles over the pre-season, so it felt like it was the best opportunity for them, primed and ready. It looked like it was following that similar path at 24-10. They did dig their heels in and obviously got back within a couple, and it was that experience, the likes of Edwards and Cleary, that were able to drag Penrith home. But I can sort of see it 2 ways from the Sharks. One, they weren't as far off the pace as they were at the end of last year, but I also thought they had a few more circumstances in their favour and they just couldn't quite get it done. So the status quo is maintained at the moment. I certainly think the Sharks come back to Australia thinking, yeah, we're a little bit closer and we're still in the mix, but I think it's important that Penrith sort of bat that away retro and just keep sort of holding those sides off. And it was a lot of what we already know for them, that they can stand up in the big moments. So they passed the test and the Sharks maybe not so much.
I'd be a little bit more optimistic of the Sharks' point of view. So, Sharks started fast. Penrith got on top, started turning the screws. And at that point, it was 16-4-ish. I thought that's the game done. And the Sharks wouldn't go away. Braden Trindle, I said last year that he would kind of take over as the dominant half. And I think he's really arrived. Nico Hines looked good, but Braden was really running the show. And he was fast and he was direct. And there was second rowers punching through gaps that the Panthers couldn't stop. On the flip side of the coin, though, when the moments matter, Penrith just turn it on. And there was a play for their fourth try with Paul Alamotti scored on the right edge with this really cool unfolding kind of triangular shape. People talk about the players that Penrith have lost. At the start of that play, you could have thrown a blanket over Isaiah Yeo, Jack Cole, Mitch Kenny at a dummy half, and Nathan Cleary. The ball goes out the back to Dylan Edwards, and then who links up finally with Alamotti, who is playing in place of Brian To'o. They are not without stars. But I think the Sharks showed a little bit of the formula of what it takes to beat Penrith. Perfection won't cut it. X factor will. And a quick tip, that's why I think the Brisbane Broncos will be premiers this year. It's teams with X factors that will get over Penrith. Perfection won't be enough.
Well, I personally can't see the Broncos being anywhere near the premiership, so I'm going to dispute on that one. I'm sure that'll come back to bite me. Someone's going to clip that up. But Cronulla, certainly the signing of Adam Fanua-Blake makes them a much better side than they were last year. He was excellent yesterday. And I've said it all pre-season that if Cronulla are going to win the premiership, and I don't think they will, but if Cronulla are going to win the premiership, then he is going to be probably their best player by the length of the straight. He provides them that X factor in the middle that they've lacked through the last couple of years. I also I enjoyed watching Braden Trindle yesterday and at the back end of last year. He's really come on in leaps and bounds, but I think for Cronulla to win the comp, I think Nico Hines has to be their leader in the spine there. He has to play the role that he did in this season. He won the Dally M. Playing that sort of form on the back of Fanua-Blake with an improving Trindle alongside him probably brings Cronulla a lot closer to the title than maybe I would have thought pre-season. But Penrith were good, weren't they? Nathan Cleary is just a star. I think one of the big things, though, is that Nathan Cleary spent so much time injured last year. The Panthers can't afford that this year. If Penrith are going to win the title, they need Cleary fit for most of the year, but there's no doubt he can push them towards that based on the way he played yesterday for sure.
Yeah, we kind of felt with Penrith that the thing that's changed each year that they've defended the title was maybe just the margin for error in terms of their depth with players getting picked off by other sides. So, yeah, I think they're in that position now where a Cleary absence would hurt them even more than it did 12 months ago when at times they looked a little bit vulnerable.
Well, Jerome
particularly
Luai
with no Jerome Luai.
Yeah.
You're going to say the same thing there. But,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, great minds there, fellas. So, look, two great games to start off the season. So, let's reel it back now. So, next thing on the rundown is just Vegas in general. Where I'll offload this one to you, Scott, but I'll go through some of the numbers here. So, in terms of capacity, Allegiant Stadium has 65,000. For the Panthers and Cronulla game, I think it was reported at 45. They got it to 45,000. I think they were aiming for that 50,000 mark. 2024, they hit 31,000. So how do you see this Las Vegas experiment going at the moment, Scott?
It's going to take a lot for me to get across the line on this because I haven't been a big fan of it from the word go. I think it's realistically, if you read between the lines, it is a play to the US betting market, which that's realistically what it is. And I'm not sure that it does much for the growth of the game globally, opening our NRL season in America. I think there are other ways that you could do it without taking NRL games there and potentially ruining a couple of teams' seasons. Obviously, that didn't happen to the fullest extent that it could have last year, but that trip back and all the rest of it does. I think it creates an unlevel playing field, put it that way. Do I think it's working? Look, better than I expected. Probably 45,000 is a good crowd. There's no doubt about that. Australians are travelling over for it. There were locals there. You only need to read the positive media coming out of it to know that there is an element that's working. But do I think it's the best option that the NRL can be taking to expand the game globally? No, not really.
Yeah, and then this year we did have the additions of the Super League games and the Women's International as well, Darren.
Yeah, we did, and obviously that was a fairly eye-opening scoreline. But yeah, I mean, you look at the Penrith Sharks factor, where if they open the season anywhere on the basis of expectation, that was going to be a big-ticket item. It's not a bad crowd, but I agree with Scott. The focus of the move is something other than that. I don't think you're trying to sign 50,000 additional NRL members out of the United States. It's purely about eyeballs on it and then a financial backing that comes from that. Obviously, every side will go through it, but not all at the same time. So it will have that imbalance in the fixture where you'll have certain sides dealing with coming back. I know the Broncos were spoken about last year, but there was probably more reasons why things went astray for them. But yeah, it's clearly a TV rights / sponsorship decision rather than we want more fans, I think.
You said, Scott, that you didn't think that it was working. I think it is working tremendously. And purely from a PR point of view. So I totally agree with you. The point and the idea of going there in the first place was the chasing of gambling revenue. Now, whether that's worked, there was some talk that some things had changed in the background that meant they weren't going to get it. But from an eyeball point of view, no one is talking about AFL. You can get an AFL article to save your life. No one's talking about soccer. No one's talking about anything else. Channel 9 sent Carl Stefanovic over this year. They have to cover it. It's too big to ignore. Apparently, it adds, I think the calculator recently was $100 million in tourism revenue to Las Vegas. So they're starting to pay a little bit of attention to it. The Wigan fans and people having the English fans, everyone spoke very positively of that. So regardless of what you get as a product for the game, from the Super League teams, and whether you roll that out to a World Club Challenge as a possibility, having that fan base there, astronomically good. It's become an event. It's become a thing like Magic Round. It really is marketed back towards Australians from a different point of view. But I don't think we're going to see, the Tomahawks make a rise again and play out of the US or something like that. But what we are seeing is just this huge wow moment to start the year. And I think the NRL will happily run it as a loss just for that.
Did Volandis say that that the Vegas feel that the NRL injection in there gave them $100 million in revenue or something of that nature? Which is an extraordinary number if that's true. Just by having it in the city in terms of turnover, the economic stimulus, I think he called it. That would be an extraordinary number. It's 17,000 Australians and 8,000 Kiwis, 10,000 from England in terms of tourists through the region over the course of the weekend. So obviously if Vegas come out of it thinking, we're getting the tourism dollar, then they'll keep paying.
Yeah, and Abdo made a point in Sorry, apologies, Scott. I was just going to say, Abdo made a point in an interview recently that even for Americans, Las Vegas is a destination they want to go to as a place. They want to go there and they want to do things while they're there. So just by being in the right place at the right time, that will see a few, Americans walk through the doors. I'm not convinced that's the real end goal. It really is marketed back towards Australians. All the merchandise and everything all gears you that way. But I'm a big fan, and I don't know if we get the same impact anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, they're all fair enough points. The one thing I'll be interested to see, I think, from a growth point of view, just going back to my originals, but what are the TV numbers going to be this year? Because last year they were extremely disappointing in America. I think even the NRL had higher hopes for what they were going to be, and they were really low last year. So if the TV numbers have gone up a little bit this year, then you might start to twist my arm a little bit on the whole thing.
Yeah, I think the whole thing centers around growth. Like if you look at other sports, like UFC is very popular in Vegas, especially. Like if you look at their numbers, 10 years ago compared to what they are now, it's incredible. So we are only in the second year, so it will be interesting to see what this looks like at the end of that 5-year deal. So, but speaking of, Scott, so there's still 10 teams left that are yet to go over to Vegas and do the trip. Titans have put up their hand to go in 2027, I believe.
Yeah, the Titans came out the other day through their CEO, Steve Mitchell, and said 2027 is their ideal time, although if they get asked to go next year, they won't say no. The way I see it probably working next year, I think the Dragons and Bulldogs are almost a lock. I think they're going. And I think you've got to have a Queensland club. I don't think you can go 4 Sydney clubs. I think you've got to save the Tigers and Eels for probably 2027 as well. So the way I'd probably go, because the Cowboys stuck their hand up a little while ago, so I'll be going North Queensland and Melbourne as the other 2 teams next year. Melbourne were in the mix for it this year before pulling out their application. But if every team's going to go at some point, I would suggest that next year we're going to see North Queensland versus Melbourne and St George Illawarra versus Canterbury.
There was some talk around Newcastle possibly heading there, but I agree with you that Melbourne and North Queensland matchup is far more appetising, and save Newcastle for another day, particularly if you can conjure up some kind of rivalry there. But I think that's a smart play.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, sorry, go.
I was just going to throw to Darren and ask him, what did you think of the fact that Shane Richardson has come out and said the Tigers, no interest, don't care?
Someone was going to do it. I guess you're never going to get that universal approval of that type of thing, and somebody was going to be honest enough, I think, to come out and say it. But it might change if they build a bit more momentum and feel like they're headed in the right direction. It might be something they then opt to embrace, but I don't think they have much of a choice in the matter, unfortunately.
Do you think they're just playing hard to get because they're not going to get picked anyway, so they're trying to break up first?
A little bit. I think that's right. It's not you, it's me principle.
Yeah.
That's good from you, Retro.
Well, it does seem that nobody wants to, especially if you're... Well, that's the thing with Titans, right? They didn't want to, in a sense, take the hit of going to Vegas because they've seen what it's done to other clubs in previous years. So, interesting one. Vegas, always a really interesting way to start a season. We'll see how it goes next year. But let's get to the rest of the competition now. So we're done with Vegas. Done for 2025. Now let's move on to the Rabbitohs. So, Retro, Wayne Bennett has claimed that the Rabbitohs can still make the top 8 and overcome these key injuries this year. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a message directed towards the Rabbitohs, not to the rest of the general public. I don't know if there's many people who would hold that with much water, but this is classic Wayne Bennett, mind games. We see Cam Murray, who in my mind is one of the premier locks in the whole game. I would pick him above Isaiah Yeo in my team. He's gone for the year with an ACL. Latrell is on tenterhooks for at least the next 8 weeks. Cody is coming back after a long injury and missed the All-Stars game with an injury. There's a lot of question marks over that squad, particularly untested halves. Lewis Dodd, maybe not as thrilling as we would have liked. Humphreys with a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, but it doesn't fill you with confidence to make the 8 when there are other teams who are vastly improving. And you're trying to compete in that space. But I think it's, like I said, classic Wayne Bennett rhetoric to speak to his own players, to say when no one else believes in us, we will, and to try and solidify the team. But I don't know, Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, Wayne Bennett was never going to come out and say, oh, no, we're not going to make the finals, was he? But... I think it's look, if there's any coach that can get a team with this many questions and injuries and all the rest of it to the finals, it's probably Wayne Bennett. He is a master man manager, and I'm sure he'll find a way to have South scaring the top teams at times. But gee, there's some big question marks as you just raised there, Retro. All of those ones. I mean, Murray. Yeah, in my mind, he is the top lock in the game. There's no ifs, buts, or otherwise about that. And he's a massive loss to this side. Lewis Dodd, wasn't impressed with him in the trials at all. You've cast your mind back over English spine players who have come out here in years gone by, and really the only one I can think of that's performed well in the halves is George Williams for about a 6-month period. Before that went sour in Canberra. So I can't see the Rabbitohs making the finals. Can they? Yeah, probably. They'd need a miracle in my mind, but they can be in the mix, but I can't see them being there. Darren, have you got any thoughts? I mean, can you see him making the 8?
Not really, but I mean, I agree with the sentiment that it was directed at the playing group. I mean, he would look at his recent history and know that he obviously had a great strike rate when he first went to the Bunnies, and obviously at the Dolphins, they punched up a little bit in terms of the depth on their list and hung in there for a while. Obviously, back ends of seasons, they battled a little bit when that depth was exposed, but he got them sort of believing and probably playing above themselves to a certain extent. So he might feel that he could do the same with what they have now. They've got a few pieces, obviously the problem child being injured in Latrell as well. So I think it's unlikely, but I think he's probably building that us against the world, galvanise the group type mindset.
And it's a real shame to see Latrell go down too, because he was looking really fit and hard and fast. Like I thought it was going to be his year, not necessarily South's going to the next level, but him really taking a big leap forward, having Wayne in his pocket. It's a really different team to the Dolphins. Dolphins were built on grit and selected that way. The Rabbitohs aren't that squad, and Wayne Bennett will pull the right triggers, but it's a big mountain to climb.
Well, and I think that creates a bigger problem for South Sydney, really, when you think about it. They're built on points, but they've just lost Cam Murray, who's got the quickest play of the ball in the competition and builds that. Damien Cook's gone out the door. We've got an unproven dummy half in Peter Mamazelos. As you raised before, Retro, the questions around the halves are enormous. Can Cody Walker actually stay on the field? There's so many questions there that I find it hard to sort of put him anywhere near the top 8, to be perfectly honest.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of, we're going to skip ahead on this rundown just because we've brought up the Dolphins. So, Darren, speaking of the Dolphins, Tom Gilbert is going to be their captain after 2 years out with injury. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, did the shoulder at the back end of 2023 and then missed all of last year with the ACL. I guess the key component, we're discussing it a bit off air, is he's 24 years of age. It's obviously a bit of a tick for his rehab that obviously they're confident now. And I mean, I know they're different injuries in the sense it's not like you do the ACL, you come back, you do the ACL again, and there's serious question marks that it might be a problem. They might feel that, look, the shoulder's fully rehabbed and he's done a knee. We get that right. There's no reason why it necessarily has to be derailed. I know he hurt an ankle a month or so ago, but came through that okay. And I think if you look at the other options, given the retirement of their inaugural skipper in Bromwich and their other options on their list are probably north of 30, maybe for a young side now with a new, younger, fresher coach, the opportunity to install a younger captain to maybe lead them for ideally 8-10 years would be the other way forward for them.
I suppose the one kicker is so Max Plath could have been an option, and a great young player for them, but Tom Gilbert was probably going to take his spot in the starting squad. And it is really interesting to see how highly they think of Tom, because you remember last year when he went down with the ACL, they actually put a little TG13 on the sleeves of their jerseys. So very early on, they marked their cards to say, we stand by Tom. So he obviously means a lot to them. What he brings in the dressing room and things like that must be immense to say, this is the guy that steers the ship. It's very much like Jared Warrior-Hargreaves spends half his playing career on the sideline or in the suspension bench, but the Roosters don't look any other way. And I wonder if Tom Gilbert is that man for the Dolphins. But I don't know, Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if you look at the way Tom Gilbert plays his game, even as a kid coming through, I remember he was in the top 10 for tackles and top 10 for run meters in his first full season in the Queensland Cup as a 19-year-old. And I think he embodies the way that the Dolphins play their game. We were discussing before when we were talking about South Sydney, how Wayne Bennett built the Dolphins around their grit. And I don't think that's going anywhere under Christian Wolf this year. So I think Gilbert embodies how they play. And I think, what you said, Darren, is 100% spot on. They see him as the captain for the next 8 to 10 years. He will lead this side sort of into the future. I don't think there was much point in naming a Felice Kafusi, Kenny Bromwich, Mark Nichols type player. I'm not sure that there's spots for all those guys in the 17 anyway all season as it is. And you're just not sure how they're going to run. But then you're looking for another captain in 2 years' time anyway. And if you look through the rest of the squad of the younger options, the only other player you'd even think more maybe he's going to be a long-term sort of fixture here is Hamisa Tabuai-Fidow, but I'm not sure he's captaincy material. I think Gilbert certainly gets the nod based on that. How he comes back from not playing an elite game of rugby league in 18 months is going to be one of this season's big questions for mine. He's going to be so important to that Dolphins forward pack and how they operate. If they're going to play finals football, he'll have a great season, I think. I think he's the right option, but jury out on just how he comes back and what sort of form he's in after such a long layoff.
Yep, absolutely. Going to be an interesting one to watch. So we're coming to the end of our show almost, but there's one more thing here on this rundown. Scott, I'm going to offload this one back to you because if there's one thing it is contract talk, and it's what keeps our site ticking over. Mitchell Moses, 2029. Is that a bit of a risk for the Eels?
There is an element of risk for sure. Firstly, I'm glad you signed so we can stop talking about it. But he's because it has been ongoing for quite some time. This whole Eels player option debacle. There's so many players there that basically have the club in the fist of their hand, and they can do whatever they want. But Moses signing on to 2029 isn't. Well, firstly, from Moses' point of view, it's an enormous show of faith in new coach Jason Riles there. To say that he's the guy that's going to take this club forward and I'm wanting to be part of that for the final years of my career is an enormous call from Moses. But from an Eels point of view, a 5-year deal, he's already north of 30. He spent the second half of last year on the sidelines injured. I'm not saying he's injury prone, but certainly players the wrong side of 30 do start to become far more susceptible to that sort of thing. And when you look at the value he's on, the reported figure is $1.3 million a year. That makes him the highest paid player in the game. There is an enormous amount of risk there for Parramatta. If he goes down with a season-long injury or just multiple little injuries throughout the season, suddenly you're chopping and changing your halfback and you've spent so much of your salary cap on one player. It has the potential to unbalance that squad. Retro, what are your thoughts on that one?
It's a tough one, and I'd be interested to bounce back to you on this. Dylan Brown, of course, is the next chess piece. And the story is that the Knights have come out with 10 million, 10 years, 12 million over 10 years or something in that figure. Now, there's two schools of thought. One, Mitchell Moses locks in. That gives more motivation for Dylan Brown to lock in. Or two, Mitchell Moses is locked in for a very tall figure. I'm not going to get my money here. I have to look elsewhere. And apparently there's another club in the hunt for him, unnamed as well. So, and if from a Parramatta point of view, if they dip their toe right into those two halves, are they the two that you're 100% sure on a 10-year plan are going to guarantee you a premiership? And how do you build your squad around them? When you're dealing with people like Cameron Smith and Billy Slater, you can pour your bank into that and be pretty safe. Are they the guys? Or was this a play to just stop Mitch Moses going to the Roosters or whoever because they're getting hungry too? So there's a lot riding in that. I'd be interested to see how all those little pieces fall. If I had to pick between signing Mitch Moses or Dylan Brown, I would pick Mitch Moses. And I don't think that his injuries are the type of injuries that, add on top of each other a little bit like Tommy Turbo's hamstrings. It's a bicep tendon here. It's the other thing there. They're not necessarily related. The recovery time will be more. You're right on that, Scott. But how do you see those contracts playing out across the board?
Yeah, well, I don't. Here's the thing. I think with Moses now signed for 1.3 million and Brown likely to command more than $1 million. First up, I don't think Dylan Brown's $1 million player. Let's just get that on the table. I don't think he's in that elite class of half. He probably could turn into that, but I don't see him in that group of players at this stage of his career. I don't see the Eels spending over, probably $2.5 million a year on their halves. It has the potential to ruin the rest of your squad in that way and the money you can spend. What's the salary cap, 11 million or 12 million roughly? So if you're spending 2 million on your halves, there goes a sixth of it straight away on two players. You've got 30 players to sign with that money. So I don't think Dylan Brown will stay at Parramatta now if the reported numbers that are coming from Newcastle and this other mystery club are correct. But I agree with you. I'd probably sign Moses ahead of Brown. But either way, there's risk involved. Darren, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, on the Brown one, it's almost a Godfather type deal. You couldn't say no to that length of time and everything that comes with it. As you say, I mean, if you end up getting... You can become injury prone at that stage, even if you haven't been, but it's also worth noting that most of the players who are injury prone, it starts to become soft tissue related. You start doing the old man injury like the calf or the hamstring and that type of thing. A lot of the random injuries, not so much, but yeah, I can understand why they've done it, but yeah, it's not without risk for a player at that stage of their career. I mean, if you you look at someone who has been injury prone, like a Pappenhausen or something like that, and then you balance up, age and those sorts of things with with risks. And I guess clubs have to be bold in terms of saying we want to keep the pack away, and sometimes you've got to take a little bit of a risk or sign someone a bit longer or pay them a little bit more. But yeah, I'm always of the cautious, conservative approach to long-term deals like that.
I think there might be one angle that may prove it to be a smart decision in the long run, in that there's 2 extra sets of bank balances about to arrive on the NRL landscape in PNG and possibly Perth. And so 1.3 may turn out to be cheap when all of a sudden, let's say the Hammer is offered 1.1 to go to PNG, or, Ben Hunt goes all the way over to Perth, or whatever. Bank balances will start to flow. So 1.3
and the salary
cap
will
very smart
move
decision
as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Scott, do you want to mention, we did talk about this off air, just with that salary cap movement, that will be factored into Moses' contract almost certainly.
Yeah, almost certainly he's got a ratchet clause in his deal through to 2029, which means the next TV deal will commence prior to Moses' contract ending. You'd imagine salary cap's going to go up with that TV deal, particularly with a 9th game per week being added. And so essentially, ratchet clause, provided he's got one in his deal, will mean his contract rises at the same percentage as the salary cap. Most NRL players have that in their contracts, full disclosure, so it's not a new thing or something that Moses is the only player who has one. But certainly that'll be something that the Eels have to factor in when they move to this new TV deal and new salary cap in a couple of years' time.
Yep. All right. So I'm going to have to cut the conversation. We could be talking about this for the rest of the day, but we do have places to be. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on. We're going to do a final round of our tips for the rest of round 1. There's 6 games left. So we'll go Retro, Scott, then Darren. So Roosters, Broncos. Retro?
As a Rooster, it's Broncos for me.
Yeah, Broncos for me. Broncos for me.
Broncos comfortably.
All right. West Tigers, Newcastle?
I'm going to go on the Tigers, I believe.
Yeah, I'm taking the Knights.
No, Tigers. I think they're finally going to shake themselves out of the doldrums. Don't think that means finals necessarily, but they'll be a much better outfit.
Agreed. Dolphins, Rabbitohs?
Fins up.
Yeah, Dolphins could be a cricket score.
Yeah, agreed. Big one.
Dragons, Bulldogs?
I think the Doggies will get the job done.
Yep.
I hate myself, but we can't beat the Bulldogs, so Bulldogs.
Yeah, they're a very fun side to watch. Dogs for mine.
Manly, Cowboys?
I think Manly at home are looking good, so I think they'll get the job done there.
How's Tom Trebojevich's hamstring? Cowboys.
Top 4 chance, Manly, I think. I think they win that.
And finishing it off with the Storm, Eels?
I think this is your lock of the round, Melbourne Storm. Never lose round 1.
Yeah, Melbourne, put the bank on it.
Yeah, haven't lost round 1, 2003 or something. So, that'll keep going.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us for the second episode of the Offload. So, Darren, you'll be around the channel every now and then. Retro, what do you want to plug? What have you got going on? Where can people find you?
You can find me across Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at retro_rugby_league. And hope to see you there.
Yeah, some absolutely class content coming out of you. And Scott Pride, what are we thinking? ZeroTackle.com, place to be.
Place to be. All your news, contract news, injury news, suspension news, anything you can rugby league related will be there. We've also got our new tipping comp up and running. New way to tip. It's very dynamic and people are loving it over the first weekend based on live odds. So definitely get around that. And of course, our season guide, there's still 13 teams yet to start their season with over 120 pages of free rugby league content. I mean, you can't beat it, can you?
Yeah. Did you put a bit of effort into that one, or?
Oh, just a little bit, mate.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us for the Offload. Have a good one. We will catch you next week. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and throw down your opinions in the comments.